about the other building being hit, and I just jumped on my bicycle with my camera on my back and rode down to the Brooklyn Bridge. Little did I know, in my pajamas. If I couldn't go any further, there was just too many people walking out. And the guy grabbed my arm and we started walking off the bridge. And I mean, it was horrible. And this woman fainted and everybody just picked her up and just kept walking. It wasn't even a second thought. And then just spent the day trying to figure out what you do next, you know. For me, I think it just helped me deal with a lot of things. I mean, it scared the hell out of me. I just don't think I'm built to see death and destruction every day. I mean, I found out my brother's wife was pregnant, and this whole thing in those buildings, it's where my brother worked, and it's just makes me mad. And it's like where my friend who died in the building lived down the street, and her boyfriend has now moved to a different place, to a different apartment, but it's like, you pass that door, and you know, it's like, oh, that's where Carrie lived. You know, you start seeing everything was a tragedy, and I didn't want to photograph any more of this sadness because it was so sad. But every time I picked up my camera, all I saw were those buildings falling, and like, I didn't want to photograph. I didn't know how to photograph in New York, and some friends of mine kept telling me about all these memorials at the firehouses. And so I went over to Engine 205 in downtown Brooklyn. I mean, it was just overwhelming. These memorials were everywhere, and they were beautiful. I mean, it was just not just friends and family. I mean, there was these kids and students bringing stuff, and I think I zoned everything else out, and so it made it easier to deal with a lot of things, but I was so in tune with the fact that, 343 men died, and I had to get to all these houses, and I had to photograph, so that's all I was thinking about. So I wasn't thinking about the terror. Firehouse on Union Street, Squad 1, and I went there, and they told me about Engine 201, and I went over there, and next thing I knew, these guys kept asking me to bring photos back. And so they were like, oh, if you get to this house, can you photograph, bring us a photo? So after a while, I was just like, I'm going to photograph them all. And I just got on my bike and started photographing. At first, it was this great thing to just photograph. And then when I started really thinking about what I was photographing, that's when it got strange. It's just like I had to get to all these firehouses, and it was taking too much time, and I wanted to do it before all the memorials were down. That's one of the things I was worried about. And so that's really what got me going and made me do all the houses and not just one or two or three. It's like you realize these guys haven't been able to talk to their friends or their other firemen to find out how everybody's doing. Like I said, these are these guys that run into buildings, and here they are, like, on the verge of tears or are crying, and they're really adamant about me shutting the door to the firehouse because one of the guys that had died had just put the new emblem on the door, and for his big promotion just 2 months before, and so the emblem was finally up there, and it was gorgeous, Squad 1, and he was in the building and didn't make it out. So everybody's seen it, and they understand, and it's, how quickly people forget, and I don't think this is something we should forget. The city's still moving. I mean, these people are still rushing back and forth. It's still New York. And then there's, these firemen are just sort of standing around. They don't really know what to do. There was a lot of that, because I don't think a lot of the firemen were used to people talking to them all the time and stopping by and bringing them food and flowers. I loved, seeing all the different firehouses, but there was one in particular. Now, how soon after were you guys over there? Were you there, or you were there right away? Here's this firehouse in the middle of Bed-Stuy that nobody really cares about. It hasn't been painted, nothing's happened to this house in probably, 10 years. I just found it more important that suddenly people were aware of them, and they weren't just this building in the neighborhood, that they were actually firemen. The neighborhood came out and they took care of the house. They brought them food, and they repainted the door, have a new mural on the side of the building, and they made sure their banners and their flyers or their flags were up and everything.
There wasn't a check, but the first amount of money we got was from a schoolgirl who went down to school.
One little girl collected all the milk money from the kids in her class and brought down $11, knocked on the door.
There were 24 kids. They had to each put in 50 cents, and she walked down on I think it was the 11th. It was the 11th to the 12th.
Right. They're just as human as the rest of us, yet they do things that none of us would do. That they didn't know if so-and-so had died, one of their friends, and I happened to have a list. And sort of reconfirmed with him, or confirmed with him, that his friend did die. And so I spent some time talking to him. When I tell people that there's still funerals every day, just for the firefighters outside of New York, they don't believe it. You know, the fact that these guys just ran into a building and didn't even question it, you know, it's completely on fire from the 70th floor up, and they're still just, you know, running up there. Let's just run to the top and see if we can put out the fire or save some lives. No, that's something I would never do. Once I started, I didn't have a choice to stop, you know, and I'm not a doctor, I'm not a nurse, I'm not a cook, I'm not, you know, an investigator, police officer, firefighter, so I can't do any of those things that I think needed to be done. And so what I do is photograph. And so I was photographing, and so I felt it was necessary to photograph every one of these memorials and document it. But it was my healing process, is what I did, so I can photograph again and I can go out and enjoy life again. So yeah, it did help. It's like, you know what? It's fine, it'll never be the same. Minus all of our feelings and the 2 missing buildings, there's a lot of times in the city you wouldn't realize anything happened. And that's wonderful, but it's also sad. I don't know, I feel better about myself for doing it.